just took off. just left. Just left you guys like, oh, I can't do this.
Thanks. Thanks, but we got this.
Okay, so I'll start in about 50 seconds. That will give us a straight minute. I think, yeah, 5 seconds. Then I'll go. All right, okay, that's great. It looks like we're live on YouTube. I see the big red button there. And on behalf of the Center of Investigative Journalism, I'd like to welcome you to this conversation on the US protests and the role of media talk. This talk is part of the CIJ Summer Investigative Journalism Conference. And my name is Kofi Smiles. I'm a digital journalist and presenter with the BBC here in the UK. And I'm going to be the talk's moderator today. We're going to be answering questions. I reckon we could leave them until the end of the talk because the guests that we've got on, they've got a lot to say. And no doubt, like when you hear them speak, you might come already armed with questions, but I think you'll be writing more down after you've heard what they've got to say because it's just going to be absolutely phenomenal. So you'll probably see a little box saying Q&A on the top, or actually it might be on different screens. You can put your questions in there and we'll get to them at the end. Try not to put them in the comment box, even though they are going to be moderated. So those of you who've got like pretty foul potty mouths, you might want to keep it down for the next hour. Do you know what I mean? Filter yourselves a little bit because we've got people watching and monitoring in the comments there. So if you do put your questions there, I think you'll be instructed to put them in the Q&A box. So, but it's all going to be good. It's going to be fun. And yeah, I think everyone should just sort of sit back, relax, take it in, listen, and hear what our wonderful guests have got to say. So I'm going to introduce the first one. We have Montanique Monroe. Montanique, do you want to say hi?
Hi, y'all.
It's quite strange with the cameras like jumping in and out. So you are a photojournalist based in Austin, Texas. Is that right?
Yes.
Oh no, sorry. Continue.
Yeah. So I'm a photojournalist, freelance photojournalist, born and raised in Austin, Texas. I graduated from Oklahoma State University in 2015 with a degree in multimedia journalism. I originally wanted to do broadcast journalism. I wanted to be a television news anchor, but quickly realized that wasn't the role I played in the field. I realized my role would be behind the camera in 2014 when I covered the death of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. I realized there that the camera was a powerful tool and that images are crucial to telling a story. And so ever since then, I've been using the camera as my tool. And today my coverage is mostly of everyday Black life in my community. I'm working on personal projects on the topics of gentrification and displacement, police violence and the effects on the families of victims, and other issues affecting Black communities.
Awesome. I'm so glad you're here, and it was nice to have a conversation with you yesterday, like before we did sort of lay the ground was a little bit. I hope you're gonna get used to my accent, or you go.
I love it. I love the accent.
Brilliant, awesome. Thank you. And no doubt, honestly, everybody who's taking part in the stream, she's amazing. I think your mind's gonna be blown, and there's gonna be some serious lessons to learn from her. So, like I said, get a pen, pencil, anything. You're going to be taking notes. Okay, well, our second guest today, Andrea May Sahori. Andrea, how are you doing? You all right? Do you want to say hey?
Hi, my name is Andrea. I am a Palestinian-American journalist. I was born and raised in Michigan. I went to the University of Michigan, and then right after graduated with a master's in journalism at Columbia in New York. And so that kind of led me to Des Moines, Iowa, which I really fell in love with local news and the crime beat, really. I know that a lot of times crime beat, it's a bad rep, but I learned that you can kind of manage it in a way that's beneficial to the community rather than reinforce stereotypes. And that's what I do. I focus a lot on crime, justice, police. And, you know, I really fell in love with that local reporting and also like narrative storytelling. So I'm happy to be here.
Brilliant, beautiful stuff. Guys, another one. keep listening, keep taking notes, Mike, because there's going to be so many lessons to learn. And also, last but not least, we have Craig Silverman. And Craig is very, very big in the world of fake news. Now, if you wonder what that means, you'll definitely be finding out throughout this conversation. So, Craig, welcome. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Craig Silverman. I'm a reporter for BuzzFeed News. I'm the media editor based in Toronto, Canada. So part of our kind of global news team that we have, and I do specialize in disinformation and other forms of media manipulation. You know, everything from like digital advertising fraud to manipulated images and video, deep fakes, and all that kind of stuff. Have been focused on that for roughly about a decade and have done a lot of reporting about the media. And now that social media is everywhere and has taken over so much, and we're all the media as well, that's sort of expanded out. And for the protests, you know, we've been doing a lot of coverage as an organization, and myself and a colleague have very much focused on a lot of the fake and misleading stuff that has been spreading and trying to investigate that and debunk the stuff that's false, but give clarity and more context to other things as well.
And I think big things that we're going to learn from Craig today is, well, just the skills that people are going to need as a journalist to be in a newsroom in terms of debunking fake news. And like, it has become such a big, big thing. And you mentioned that, I think the word that's sort of gotten a lot of people creeped out these days is deep fakes, how to spot what is fake. And because we're journalists and we're telling the news, the essence of it all is truth. And if we can't tell the news, if we can't tell the truth as journalists, then, you know, what do we have? What does that mean for the profession? But since we're on the topic of journalism, I want to start. The first question I had in mind is why journalism, and what does journalism mean to you? So, Craig, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I ended up in journalism initially because I really loved writing. And so that's what first drew me in, storytelling. And then from there, the thing that absolutely captivated me, and I think still kind of drives me today, is just that ability to find out things that maybe other people don't know, or give context to something that maybe people have misunderstood. And that, I think, is just such a powerful thing to be able to do. And when we are journalists, you know, we do have a certain element of privilege in that we can sort of force structures and people and organizations to answer us. And this is something that, you know, happens all the time, where there are people who just, they can't get a response, they can't get something to happen. And as a journalist, you know, you have an ability to kind of step in and use some of that power and that privilege to actually give a voice to people, but also to hold some important institutions and public figures and companies and others accountable. And that, I mean, that for me, I think that drives me every day, in addition to wanting to, try to find stuff that maybe other people haven't seen or haven't read and tell something new. And learning every day new skills of ways of investigating our digital environment is something that I'm really passionate about, because it's, you know, there's so much information out there of all different types and coming from all different places. And we've got to be at the bleeding edge of being able to sift through this stuff and help guide people. And so that's a big piece for me today as well.
And I love the fact that you use the word privilege, journalistic privilege. You feel like the more journalists, I don't want to say abuse or sort of flex this privilege, the harder it is for us to retain the trust of the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be aware of that privilege that we have. And we also have to be aware that we are, in the media, often very much part of the power structures that exist in our societies. And the media has at times, you know, as much as we can be a force for good, we've also helped propagate falsehoods. We've also helped, you know, push forward at times white supremacy and things in the world. And so I think if you're going to do this job, you have to have a certain awareness and humility about you, about the structure and organizations that you're a part of, and understand that as much as you can do good, you can also do harm. And so, you know, that shouldn't be something that you wake up and you're scared of every day. But if we don't do our job thinking about all of those factors, then I think we can go astray, and we can use the power and privilege that we have for bad things. So it is something, you know, journalists talk about ourselves in very lofty terms, and I think we need to hold ourselves accountable as much as we can as well.
Beautiful stuff. Thanks, Craig. Montanique, I know you gave us a little bit of an insight into why you're in the profession you are as a photojournalist, but why journalism, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I guess just a little backstory about my life. I learned my father was killed by a police officer I was around the age of 6 to 9 years old when I learned about it. And he died when I was only an infant. And so as a kid, you know, helpless, you have so many questions, like what can I do? What happened? What was the reason he was killed? And I made a little pact to myself as a little girl that I would one day tell his story. And through learning about journalists like Ida B. Wells, who covered the lynchings of Black men across the nation, I realized that through journalism, I could do that. And so I've actually been on a journey recently to tell my father's story through this past year before all of the national unrest across the country. And it's been a kind of discouraging process because I haven't been able to get the story picked up. But what keeps me going in this field is the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors living in my community, still living in my community, and those who have gone, and their stories have been untold. And I think all of this goes to what Craig just said. When you're a journalist, it's about holding institutions, structures, people in power accountable. And there's something about journalism and visual storytelling that can provoke change. And so that's my role in this field.
Awesome, thank you. Last but certainly not least, Andrea, why journalism and what does journalism mean to you?
So kind of piggybacking off of what Craig said, I've always been a writer. I used to like write little novels when I was young, fake novels, obviously, but nothing published, but I was always writing. I always loved to write. And by the time I got to college, I had a really interdisciplinary major where I could like write about history, culture, sociology, political science, women's studies, etc. And I realized that I really just have like a love for people and I have a love for different perspectives. And then, you know, when it was kind of time to be like, okay, what do I want to do? It kind of just flowed naturally. Like, yeah, I want to do journalism. And I think a lot of that prompted from, honestly, like my distrust in the media growing up as a Palestinian in America and seeing a lot of, you know, terrorist stereotypes describing Palestinians. And I never really trusted the media because, you know, you see your people depicted as like violent, violent terrorists all the time. And I never thought it was accurate or one-sided. But it was kind of then, you know, when I was in that decision, like, yes, I want to do journalism, like having those memories of distrust, I was like, well, we need representation in the media. We need more Arab journalists. We need more Palestinian journalists, not just in the national level, local level. And I think, you know, a huge problem with that is that when, you know, you write in your application, there's no Arab or Middle Eastern check mark. So it's hard to even have that inclusivity. But honestly, just like being in journalism just feels like a privilege, and really just to be able to amplify voices, because that's what I wanted when I was young, is to people to amplify Palestinian voices. And so for me to do that for other people, for me to give my voice to other people, it's just really like honorable, I think, and really humbling. And I loved it. I love it. I love talking to people, interacting with different people, listening to what they have to say. And so, yeah, that's really how I got into it and why I love it. And yeah.
Well, before we get into sort of the dive into the nitty gritty of the US protest and journalism, I want to just have a quick sort of, a look at Twitter and the fact that people seem to go to it as it's their go-to app for what's happening, what's going on, what is happening there and then in the moment. And as people could literally, they live tweet, live stream things that are happening, blow by blow, play by play. Where do you think this leaves journalists? You know, are people looking for at journalists for the news now, or are journalists there for the afterthought, the analysis? You know, what are your opinions on that? Andrea, do you want to kick us off? Andrea, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, can you repeat that question for me?
So obviously people using Twitter as almost like the main source of us finding out the news, because people are live streaming things as and when they're happening. Where does that leave journalists?
Yeah, you know, what kind of like the structure that we've been doing at the Des Moines Register, because you're so short staffed, you don't have time, and everything's going on so fast. What we've kind of been doing is sending reporters on the ground, live streaming, live tweeting. So editors or other reporters can kind of put it in like a live blog. There's pros and cons for that, I think. I think there's been a lot of frustration when, you know, obviously some things kind of get like mumbled or, you know, misconstrued because you're not the one writing it technically, you're the one reporting it. And I think that's an issue. And we've had feedback from that, like miscommunication, I would say. And it's hard because these are, you know, fast-paced environments. But I think that we live in a time where social media is valuable like that, where you can see what's going on in real life and hold people accountable. For instance, as a journalist, being able to see what protesters are seeing and what they're hearing and being able to record that with them, we almost have that, you know, privilege and I guess more credibility. It's like, sucks to say, you know what I mean? That like, yeah, here's a journalist that's seeing that too. And like, it's important for us to be there and report on that. And I think that having something live on Twitter right away is just really, it's just really powerful, I think, in holding people accountable. And especially when you have instances of police brutality where, you know, historically police have lied about accounts or not given out information, but then you have videos. And I think it's just really important for, you know, journalists to be there as well.
I was wondering if we could hold it there, because your story and I guess everything that's been happening to yourself this year is I don't want to say interesting to it, but it's, I'm trying to think of the most polite way to put it is like, well, yeah, let's say interesting, because of like, you know, you were in Maine, you were pepper sprayed and you were handcuffed. And can you take us through what happened? And I want to know is, can you ever prepare for something like this as a journalist?
You know, it's funny, in grad school, you know, I learned a lot about community to protect journalists and everything that's going on and how the US is not, it's not secluded. This happens here where journalists are targeted. But honestly, like I didn't expect it to happen to me, especially as a Palestinian. You do have that like privilege of, because there is anti-Black racism, and to some people I don't know, some people I might be white passing, but I really like wasn't expecting it. I was just reporting. I had been reporting all that weekend. Basically what happened, like I was saying, I was live tweeting, and I think the last and it was a really chaotic scene. It's a really it was at Merle Hay Mall, which is a really commercial area. And it's like midday right now. So cars are going by. So protesters at first were holding out signs and kind of crossing the streets and blocking the roadways. Police came out with riot gear. They made their formations. This was pretty typical at that point. And it was a little bit honestly expected because they had been doing that. And they kept pushing, telling people to disperse, but not really saying where to go. Some people started looting, and once people started looting, I think things got a little even more tense and hectic. They deployed they deployed tear gas, and like the last like picture I have is like of me being like, okay, tear gas deployed, forcing protesters to literally run into this busy intersection. There was nowhere to go. And including us, we were running from the tear gas, we were dispersing from the tear gas. And as we were dispersing, like 2 minutes later, I see cops charging, because that's kind of what they do. What I've seen is they'll throw, you know, they'll throw tear gas and then start charging at protesters and making these mass arrests. And I was just one of, you know what I mean? I was one of them, and he just grabbed me, and immediately I put my hands up and I said, I'm pressed. And, you know, I can't talk too much about other things because I do have charges against me still. But basically, yeah, he pepper sprayed me right all on my side of my arm, and then again all over my face. I couldn't see anything, and I was kind of just standing there being like, I'm pressed. Like the whole time I was saying, I'm pressed, I have a badge, et cetera. And yeah, it didn't really matter. So yeah, I was put in the back of the paddy wagon, I was arrested and I still have charges for interference with official acts and failure to disperse.
And I guess like when you go back and watch that video, because and for everyone who's watching hasn't seen it, if you head over to Andrea's Instagram, I think it's on Twitter. I think it's on there. He owns Twitter. I think it's on there, and I just think it just feels like it feels very dystopic. Do you know what I mean? Because the angle, it's like it's in portrait mode. It's shooting down like this, and you've got this red light in the background. It's like, is this a shot from a film? Is it a viral campaign? It's like, no, this is what is actually happening right now to journalists. Like, what goes through your mind when you go back and watch it? If you go back and watch it.
Honestly, I'm like amazed by how calm I am because in the days leading after it, I didn't realize how traumatic it was for me. Because at the time you have like adrenaline and you're like, okay, like this is happening. Like keep saying you're oppressed, keep saying you're oppressed. Like, you know, obviously don't piss them off further. But I just really didn't realize how traumatic, like, and how I was able to be so calm in that moment. And also like, how did I think about that? Really, it was because I was surprised that they didn't take my phone away at that moment. Obviously, eventually they did when I went to the jail. But I was like, okay, if I'm gonna have my phone, like I need to like let people know what's going on, because I had expressed that I'm pressed multiple times. I can't stress that enough. Like at least like 100 times. Like I'm pressed. I work with the Des Moines Register. I was name dropping like police officers because I'm in the crime beat, right? So I'm name dropping police officers I had frequently speak to and talk to, and you know, I can't get into details further yet, but yeah, I think it was just really surprising that it happened to me, but more so it happened in a small city like Des Moines, Iowa. I don't know if a lot of people know what Des Moines, Iowa is. It's not necessarily that these kinds of protests are unprecedented, but it's been a while, you know? Usually you'll have like one protest, but not like this ongoing thing. So I think it was kind of shocking, not just for me, but the community. Like, whoa, like their police are actually arresting journalists now, you know? So
it's interesting when journalists get arrested, because I kind of wonder what that does for the credibility of a journalist. Is it like a badge of honor, or is it people like saying you're not doing your job if you're breaking the law? How do people see it? How do people see yourself? Do you look in the mirror and like, that's a badass, you know what I mean?
I think about that a lot because I don't worry about myself. I think that in my career, I think anyone who is, let's say my charges aren't dropped, let's say I have two simple misdemeanors, I think any employer will look at that and understand, because this has been covered in the media, you know what I mean? They can research. I think I'll be okay. But really, like what I get really sad about is like my privilege of having that support as a journalist and seeing unlawful arrests and, you know, of protesters who like don't have a lawyer there for them or you know, or that kind of like institutional support. And I think that I like think about that a lot in my coverage as well. That privilege as me is having that support. As a badge of honor, I mean, my news director made me a press badge with my mugshot. So I thought that was kind of funny. I carry that around just to be kind of like a, you know, fuck you kind of thing. Kind of thing. But probably shouldn't have swore. But yeah, I think it's funny. I don't know if it's a badge of honor, but it's definitely experience.
Awesome. And I want to park it there because I'm going to come back and ask you some questions a little bit more about being in the thick of it and the people that you're actually mingling with. But Montanique, obviously you're in there as well. Do you know what I mean? You are, I guess, like, you're straddling two lines here, because as a journalist, as a photojournalist, you know, people could potentially see you as a threat or feel you as a threat. The protesters are thinking, whose side is she on? Is she going to be taking photos that incriminate us? And obviously, we know what's happening with certain authoritative forces, police forces, how they see the press. How do you feel when you're in there in the thick of it, taking photos, getting involved in a protest?
Yeah, great question. I think that so, I mean, me as someone who has lost a father, well, I'm a Black woman before I'm anything, before I'm a journalist, before I'm a photojournalist. And so as someone who's lost a father to police brutality, I'm on high alert when I'm around law enforcement. And so I'm going in there cautious. Not only, like I said, I'm a Black woman, now I'm wearing a mask, so you can't see my face. I have 2 large cameras on each arm that can be mistaken for weapons. And so my process of going into documenting a protest, like the first protest I documented happened at midnight, so it was really late. As I'm walking toward the police department, I have my cameras up like this so they know that I'm a photographer. I have my badge, and as I'm walking past officers, I say, I'm press, and I make eye contact with them. But as far as, and Andrea, I'm so sorry, the experience you had with tear gas. I also had an experience, but I'm very, like I said, I'm very cautious. I'm very scared of being hit by rubber bullets, being tear gassed. And so I try my best not to even come close to being in those situations, but unfortunately I was. But as far as the people who are participating in the demonstrations, they know me. And so when we look at each other, there's a sense of comfort I get when I see them. And I think I can say the same for them, that there's a sense of comfort that they get when they see me. And so I can really just exist sometimes when I'm covering protests, because I've been covering my community for a while. I see people at, little events across the city, at the park or at church. And so when it's on the demonstrator side, it's very, comforting. But when it comes to documenting law enforcement, I think that's been the most challenging thing for me.
Okay. And I think when we were talking yesterday, you mentioned something like that really sort of, I can't stop thinking about when you say, look, you're in there as a Black woman involved in the protest, you've got your mask on, as you said, I'm just seeing the pictures, the visuals, and you've got your 2 cameras hanging either side in the waist. And I've seen what the straps are like that photographers wear. And I never really thought of the sort of how militant that could look. Yeah. People don't really seem to pick up on this, do they? That, cops or whoever's meant to be policing a protest could see them as weapons. I'm like, do you often have to? Sorry.
A lot of photographers in the photo industry, I know for sure Black photographers and maybe some non-Black, we are very cautious about being in any situation, even when it's not a protest and there's law enforcement there, our equipment being mistaken for weapons. And it's really scary for me because, like I said, my father was killed by a police officer, and we have mass shootings that happen in schools. And so, everyone is really on high alert, especially during a protest. So it's been a very scary journey for me.
And I guess it's, it just adds to the layer cake of, I guess, like obstacles that you have to overcome as a Black photojournalist. And I guess I sort of want to look at opportunities within journalism. How do they fare as a Black woman getting into journalism? What are the opportunities like? How do you get the opportunities that are there? Are the specific avenues you have to take in order to sort of get people to feature your work or to hire you?
Yeah, well, for me, my route into this field wasn't traditional. After college, I went to the University of Texas, and I've been working as a digital content producer for the past 5 years, but I've also been pursuing freelance photojournalism part-time. And I can say that the only reason I'm probably speaking on this panel today is because after the death of George Floyd, there has been a lot of conversation about including Black writers, Black photojournalists, including Black voices when it comes to Black issues. And so I can say that unfortunately, after the death of another Black man, I've kind of been discovered in this field. And now I'm getting opportunities that I've been trying to get for a long time now. And it's kind of an internal battle that I'm dealing with, that a Black man had to die for it to happen. But at the same time, I'm so happy that I can tell these stories and, be a voice for my community and people who I know who have been fighting this fight for a long time. I will say that in the beginning, when the national unrest started across the nation, I would see a lack of Black photographers being used. I think the New York Times ran One of their papers had 4 images from protests from 4 white photographers, and that kind of went viral. And I've seen a lot of the images kind of push the white allies to the forefront of the protests. And so for me, I knew my role from the beginning. Since I've been in my community, I knew that I wanted to find those individuals who have been there, who have been fighting, and kind of showcase the progression of their work from before protests to now. Because I don't know if y'all know too much about Austin, Texas, but Austin, Texas is not really about that life. I've never seen the people of my city show up and fight for Black lives like this. We've had women's marches. We have your typical MLK parade, but I have never witnessed anything like this in my life, in my city. So it's been, I've had all the emotions during this time, and it's been a journey documenting it.
And we're going to have a look at some of your photos a little bit later. Definitely have a scan through. Now, Craig, I think this has been a big moment for editors on all sorts of online publications, because trying to decipher what is right and what is wrong, what is the truth, is what has been going on with the protests has been an absolute minefield for so many people, especially the fact that, and you guys over at BuzzFeed have got that list of myths and things that have been debunked. And I was going through the list and I was really embarrassed because there was a few of them that I remember retweeting thinking it was true. And I was just like, oh, there's actually quite a lot on here that I didn't realize. And I was just sat there cringing, like, oh, just watching my journalistic credibility go down the drain. But how important is it with fact checking now? And like, are we experiencing such a lack of it because people are so quick to see something on Twitter? People like myself are so quick to see something on Twitter, but like, oh my God, that's terrible. It lines up with everything I know about this event. And then bang, retweet, and you've sort of passed on some fake news to, all your followers.
I mean, first of all, thank you for your confession. So I want to absolve you now. That's good. Put it out there. That's good, man. You wanted to confess, so I'm here for you. I think there's a couple of things, big things that cause a huge amount of false and misleading information to spread in our media environment today. One of them is just human nature, and you sort of alluded to it, that if you see something, you read something, it aligns with your worldview, with some knowledge you have or an experience you have, like you're going to be very receptive to that piece of information. So if whatever biases and strongly held beliefs you have, if something aligns with that, like you're all in for it. It's right there. And then that second piece is like, well, this media environment where it is so easy to instantaneously and frictionlessly share and propagate things, which is a great thing, because you can have voices that maybe didn't get elevated before. They can get into this environment without having to be part of a big news structure, right? That's a great thing. But at the same time, anybody can create something, understanding that human nature piece, and appeal to people's bias and get it moving and get it out there quickly. And so the fact that it is so easy to hit the retweet button or share or what have you, or regram something, that's creates the environment that stuff can just take off and go insanely viral. And so I do think as everyday work, but especially when we have, big breaking news events, powerful social movements, these are the kinds of things that there are strongly held beliefs about. And so, naturally, there's going to be certain elements of false and misleading information. And then on top of that, you have people who want to undermine these efforts, people who want to kind of, try and mess with the media environment, try to mess with the media, try to mess with whether it's protest leaders or, doctors talking about epidemiology and the coronavirus. So, and then of course, there's all of us out there who are trying to make sense of this complete deluge of information, and may not have, the tools and the certain very specific types of media literacy at our fingertips to be able to sift through it. And so that's for us where we feel like, okay, maybe we can help guide people a little bit. And so my colleague Jane Litvinenko and I mean, we create usually these running posts around breaking news events. We've done it for coronavirus. We've done it for these protests. We've done it when there's, mass shootings and, earthquakes and other kinds of events. We create threads on Twitter. We really put out calls to the people out there, to our audience, to people on Twitter and elsewhere to say, send us the stuff you're seeing. Like, you may not know if it's true or if it's false. If you're just wondering about it, send it to us. And so we feel like there's an element of almost customer service to be done for audiences, where it's a very mutual thing. They're sending us stuff they're seeing. We can bring some of our, our research and our skills to bear and actually get back to them and help do it. And when it comes to the protest, I mean, there's just been an insane amount of false and misleading information. And it's been a really, an ongoing project to do that, as well as a news organization to be documenting these protests, to be at them, to be profiling the young leaders who are stepping up and working on them. And also, to be looking at what the government and law enforcement is doing. I mean, a colleague of mine had a great story where he got the records to show that a very advanced type of spy plane was used the approach there. And so you have, an element of kind of very unconventional state surveillance that was happening around these protests. And so we're trying to get, a full view of it. And we do think that disinformation piece of it is one of the services that we should be doing for the audience at that time.
Would I be right in saying, you look back in the day, obviously when things weren't as digital, as technical, those who were in power, those who had money could manipulate the message a lot more rather than and control the media. Whereas you look at things now, the news, an individual can weaponize the news and disrupt things so much more themselves. This must make creating news and staying on top of news so much harder. And do you think that because the increased pressure of deadlines of getting the news out there and making sure it's got the right news and traction online, do you think that is overriding people's sort of, need and vigilance in telling the truth, or wanting to make sure they can confirm the truth?
I do think the digital environment has created a sort of expectation of always publishing, always there. And for people in newsrooms to basically always be available, right? For journalists to unplug can be really difficult at times. And so I think there has been an element of that. I also think there's been a somewhat encouraging trend over recent years of trying to pump the brakes a little bit on just jumping on viral stuff. And look, I work at BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed is an organization that didn't start doing journalism, that was just all about what was viral and was not doing like reporting and debunking for the early parts of that organization. Now we have a news organization where we've instilled those kind of journalistic standards, and we take stuff that is viral really seriously. We take stuff that's on the internet really seriously. And that can be like the crazy stuff that K-pop stans are doing on Twitter and other platforms. And it can also be, stuff around, so-called serious news events. We take everything seriously in the digital environment. And part of that is kind of what you mentioned, whereas before you had people who a small number of people who controlled massive distribution for the media, and the owners of newspapers and the owners of TV stations could absolutely influence what was put out there. And the fact that they were in power and would be aligned with other people in power in politics absolutely influenced what people saw. And we have to be, in journalism, we have to be aware of that and acknowledge that. And the other side of it is now, many more people can participate, but of course, it's an environment that's easier to manipulate than ever before. You can buy fake social media accounts. You can, pretend to be someone you're not. You can, try to manipulate hashtags and other things. And so I think for me, in newsrooms, they need to have an awareness of that potential for manipulation of the digital environment, because it would be terrible for us to elevate, a trend that was a hashtag that was trending because people were manipulating. It'd be terrible for us to treat, sock puppet accounts run by whether it's Russian trolls or, incels or other kinds of extremists out there pretending to be someone they're not. And so we've got to have an awareness of this kind of stuff as we're doing our job, because the digital environment just kind of touches every aspect of the work we do now.
I am curious, and Andrea and Montanique, feel free to jump in on this, is, what does this quest for truth look like today when in journalism? Is anyone compelled to give a balanced argument? And does the need to sort of, and I guess, do we have to tell a balanced story over the truth, or does the truth override everything in terms of, being able to sort of see both sides of the story?
A lot of what Craig was saying, I was like, wow, like this is happening like in local levels. Like I'll have activists send me stuff like, look at this, why aren't you reporting on this? And kind of like not understanding that we have to go through a process. We can't just look at a video and then publish it and say that's fact. You know what I mean? Of course, it helps when a journalist is there, like I was saying earlier, but I see that all the time. And, you know, that can be really frustrating because you want to be, especially in local journalism, you want to be there for your communities. You want to amplify their voices. You want to report on injustices, and it takes time sometimes. And I think, you know, what I've been having a lot of conversations with my editor is kind of like, you know, we're kind of required to talk to police and have like their side, you know, of the story. But, you know, we kind of talk about, should it be in the beginning of the piece? Should it be at the end? You know, a lot of our journalists believe that no, like in these instances, like the lead shouldn't be police said this, but a lot of people would disagree. I think that it starts with like a conversation. And just in my opinion, I don't necessarily think that police should always have the final word. I don't think that that's necessarily fair or unbiased or balanced, if that's a better word, especially when you have clear disproportionate use of force, you know. And I think that's where I kind of stand on that is yeah, maybe we do have to talk to police, but there are ways to go about that where you're not just reinforcing those power structures. You're not necessarily, you're getting their perspective, but not the final say on it, you know? I don't know if that's making sense, but I get videos all the time, like, why aren't you covering this? And, you know, it's difficult, and we really try hard, so.
I'm just curious because at the BBC, obviously we are a government-funded institution, so when we're telling stories, it has to be balanced and down the middle. But when we're talking on things like the murder of George Floyd, when we're dealing with things like racism, we can talk about it from the perspective and the point of view of, let's say, a protester or someone who has been affected by police brutality and violence. And we can tell a story like that, and the responses to it are like, oh, why are you propagating left-wing media? Do you know what I mean? Why are you shoving this sort of stuff down our throats? And it's like, you know, how can you really give a balanced story when it evolves around racism? Because taking a stance against racism must be like, racism is bad, right?
Exactly. And how many times do we have to see these journalists seeing these like disproportionate use of force? Like, I'm not blind, you know what I mean? And as much as like I want to be, you know, I am fair and balanced, I'm seeing what I'm seeing, you know what I mean? So, and I think that, you know, it's just like I said, I think it's just going to be I think these protests are really going to force conversations about that in newsrooms, you know, globally, honestly, just because if you're seeing racism, call it out, you know, should you call it out as racism? And, you know, and all of that conversation. And it's already happening. And I think it's happening at local levels too, which is really exciting to see. But yeah.
And since we're on this roll, you're in the thick of it with protesting, and, you know, we're talking a little bit about speaking the truth because you're in there with the people. You know, do you think that with news reports, when the news reports they show the audience, when the audiences see the news reports, do you think that the audience isn't seeing the crowd, the protesters, as individuals? You know, they forget that they are just that, they are just people.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that journalists need to understand that is like, these are your community and vice versa. They're our community. We're part of their community. And yes, like we have to be fair and balanced, but we also are there to serve the community. We're a public good. So I think that just being able to look at these protesters and humanize them and not just be like, okay, they're subjects to a story. I think that's a little bit different. You have to, because that forces you to understand like, okay, they're on the streets, but what keeps them on the streets? What are these local issues? You know, what are the local issues that drive them to continue to be out here every single day? And I think that can be neglected a lot. And I think the reason why is because we're not looking, you know, I don't want to generalize, but like journalists, I think it's important to humanize, you know, recognize people as humans. I know that sounds crazy to say, but there's a reason why they're out there, and getting to that and providing that context is it just makes the reporting, in my opinion, just all the more better. Because I mean, like in Des Moines, and I know Monique was talking about like how Austin, yeah, it's kind of like, this is crazy what's going on there, and it's crazy what's going on here, but it doesn't mean that these issues didn't exist before. It's just that it's just coming up in a movement. And I think by acknowledging people's humanities and seeing as people and listening to what they have to say, I think that we get a much more complete picture of the protests and stuff. So.
And I think, Montanique, this is where like you come in, and because you can see the reports, you can read a story online, you can hear about looters burned down a McDonald's, which was one of the news stories. I think like Craig and his team will manage to figure out that was fake. You see this, that's what you associate with everybody there. But then there's the photographers, the pics, the snaps that they take and show people holding hands. You've got the barriers of like white allies protecting black protesters. You've got black protesters protecting police officers that have gone down. Montanique, when you're in there and you're seeing all this happen, what makes you click? Do you know what I mean? What is the moment that makes you think like, I've got to snap this?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, when I go to protests, I kind of just try to sit with them in the moment at the beginning. Like, I go in and I just observe and look around and see what's happening, the movements that are happening around me, the chants that are being chanted out. And I kind of just look for those. I know that a lot of the coverage you see, like the burning buildings and the broken glass, I don't necessarily go toward those moments. I more so look for the intimate moments. I go to the back of the protest and I look for those intimate, quiet moments of people really sitting with themselves and showing passion. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I really just sit with, there's times where I have even chanted with the protesters because, I mean, and this all goes back to the discussion of objectivity. There's a lot of discussion of who does objectivity benefit as journalists. And this goes back to me being a Black woman and being someone who's experienced this firsthand. Like I am literally in the thick of it with these protesters. They are marching for people like me and my father. And so my approach has just been to look for those people I've seen in my community this whole time for the past 3 years fighting this fight, and to look for those who haven't been able to have a platform to share their stories. I don't know if that answers your question, Kofi.
No, it's good because it said that, sometimes some people going, I see some photographers at events and just snapping away, clicking, yeah. Especially with some of the events we've had. It's like, they're sort of, the bang and done. And it's almost like, we know that the end game is just to sell these on to someone or pass it on to someone rather than to, I don't know, it's almost quite transactional, where there's been some other photographers which have taken the knee in the rain with us, for a whole 9 minutes and have stuck around and chatted and spoken. And some photographers I've seen who have hardly used their camera because I think they're just so captivated about what's going on. Like, especially where I've grown up in like sort of Northern England, where there's not that many Black people, and they're seeing a bunch of, white kids, white people turning up in the masses to support Black Lives Matter. And they're like, wow, this is the shift, this is the change. But I was wondering, we've got some of your photos, haven't we? Do you think we could have a look? Do you mind taking us through through a bunch? Because I know there's some I've seen online. I'll tweet out after this and I'll tag the CIJ in it, and some incredible ones. Pardon?
I just pulled a few together just not too long ago, actually. But so this image was made on the first night that I went out to protest at midnight. And I actually had learned about the protest through Facebook. We were just talking about social media. So one of the guys in my community, his brother had been shot 7 times by several police officers, and he actually lived. And so the way I heard about this protest was he got on Facebook Live and said, hey, you know what, we're tired of this. We're going to Austin Police Department and we're gonna voice our opinions. And so I strapped up midnight, got my mask, got my cameras, and I went out. I told my grandmother I was going out. And I made these 2 images. This was a lady, Blanche Bradley. She's the aunt of Ahmaud Bradley, who was killed by Austin Police Department. And so that was the first time I had ever met her. But as I said, I'm working on a long-term project about the effect of police violence on the. So I was happy to connect with her. This photo is one of my favorite images. This was a protest, I think a few days later, and protesters were headed to shut down the highway. And I had never witnessed anything like that in Austin. And this lady right here, I was standing, I think I had ran ahead in front of the march, and I had seen her from a distance. So I knew I wanted to get that photo. I knew I wanted her to just be in the frame by herself. And I knew I wanted to get that "Let Us Live" sign. And this kind of shows, or for me, it's powerful because Black women have been in the forefront of many civil rights movements from the beginning of time. And so, I thought about myself as a Black photographer, being a part of this movement, and then her, sharing her voice through this sign. This was a protest at the Texas Capitol. And so it was just a peaceful protester holding an illustration of George Floyd. This was later that day on the highway when demonstrators had kind of shut down the highway. And at this point, police officers decided they weren't going to force them to get off the highway. I think they had gotten too far. So this was just an intimate moment where this Black man was looking at police officers, and you can see it, the sign was very powerful.
Mm. And do you know what, with that one you've just showed us, it was a baton sticking out of his hand.
Yeah.
Like he's almost ready, like my son's matter, and he's almost sort of lined up with it. And it's like, it's peaceful, the threat is still there.
Yeah, it was a very powerful moment. I actually sat there for a while until he left and just kind of took it all in, because it was just really powerful for me. And you can see in his eyes that he was serious. This was another moment on the highway. These guys, they just stood up there with their Black Power fists for like 10 minutes straight, didn't say a word. And I just thought that was a very intimate moment. So this moment, as you can see, people are running away from police officers. This was, I believe rubber bullets were shot toward protesters. And so I am also running as well, but as I'm running, I'm like turning and I'm still snapping as I'm running, because I was scared. Actually, a guy who was shot with rubber bullets in Austin is actually on life support now, fighting for his life. So it can be a really traumatic experience. This was another moment on the highway. This was after officers had thrown tear gas at demonstrators. And here, this is one of my favorite images that I've taken. And actually, I was in front of these three demonstrators, and I took a few frames in front of them, but quickly moved because right before that, the officers were shooting tear gas at demonstrators. So I didn't want to be tear gas. And there's kind of a fear of having law enforcement behind me. I didn't feel really comfortable. And so I moved around to the back of these demonstrators and noticed that her sign said enough is enough. And I thought this was a really powerful image. It's one of my favorite images. This is at a peaceful protest that was organized by Black people for Black people in Austin, Texas. And these are longtime residents of Austin. And this event was like this young gentleman right here in the middle with the eyes, his name is Claren. He was the one who organized the first protest I went to. His brother was shot 7 times by Austin Police Department. And I had been keeping up with his story for the past 3 years since his brother had been shot. But this event was really to elevate the voices of victims of police brutality. They actually asked me to speak that day, but I'm not ready to get on stage and tell my story yet. So this is a really emotional event for me. I actually had a breakdown during this event because, you're in the heat of the day. I'm wearing a mask. I can't breathe. I'm trying to protect myself from a virus. And then I passed up the opportunity to speak about my father so I could document this moment. And so this was a very intimate moment where Lawrence Parrish, he was shot 7 times by police officers, and he made his first public statement in front of 5,000 people in Austin. And it was just so beautiful for me because I've seen his journey. And so that was a really, this is his brother, Clurin, who I've been following for the past 3 years. And so they actually have an ongoing lawsuit with the police department now because of what his brother experienced. And so it was just very powerful to see them finally get this opportunity to share their voices. And that's really what I've been trying to do during my coverage, is give, make images of people who have been fighting this fight for a long time.
Do you know what I find quite perverted? And I've spoken to my mum about this. It's like, and I don't know if you guys might feel the same. I don't know what your education was like. If you must have studied the civil rights movement in school, but we were looking at images not dissimilar like this in our history books. And for quite a lot of us, we were part of this now. Do you know what I mean? Maybe in 30, 40, 50 years time, we're going to be in, I don't know, the VR chips that kids are teaching on in the
it's
future.
Amazing. It's definitely being a part of this archival history in this process. These images will be used in decades to come about and tell this story of what we've gone through here in this year, 2020.
And I don't know if it's because of the high definition and because we've actually taken part in the process and we're feeling it now, we're really part of the moment now, but the trauma, it just feels so much more real when you see these current photos. And I know some of the photos from the past have been horrific and you think, God, that is awful, that is terrible. But now it's like, because of the way that everything is just so magnified, you know what I mean? You're zooming up on, you're getting these expressions, you can see the feel and the tone in people's eyes. And you just feel the weight of it. Now, like, Craig, I need to ask you, you see a picture that of something from that Montanique's done, and you think, right, okay, great. What's the story here? What is the process that yourself or the team that you work with, journalists in the newsroom, what do they do in order to sort of clarify and make sure that, okay, this picture backs up what this tweet is saying, we can go live with that, or we can retweet this, or we can go live with our report? Any like tips or tricks or for any budding journalist out there to be able to, decipher what is real and what isn't?
Yeah, images are a good place to start, because if you think about the majority of kind of misleading information that's out there, images are just so powerful, and photos that are taken out of context, it's probably one of the most, if not the most common thing that we see. And so, the first basic thing that everybody needs to know how to use is reverse image search. And the good news about it is, like, this is a free tool that's widely available. So if you've never done reverse image search, the easiest way to do it is to just, Google reverse image search. And it's just like you can put in some text in Google and get hits related to those words or that phrase. You're able to take an image. So if we see an image and it's being shared on Twitter and people are saying it's from this protest at this moment and it's newsworthy, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to find out, where did this image originate? So who took the image? Where is the image? Date, time, location, the originator of it. And then once you can actually confirm it's like, okay, this is a photo from this place at this time, then you also have to be aware of things like misleading context. Well, is it really zoomed in and not giving us the full picture of what's going on around it? And that's when we would go to try to find other, say, tweets and Instagram posts from other people in the same location. Can we get a much bigger and broader sense of what's actually happening rather than just one image? So reverse image search will tell you where else online that image has been. And if somebody says, I took this photo 10 minutes ago at a protest, and that photo gives you results in Google from 2 years ago, you know that it's not from a protest taken 10 minutes ago. So reverse image search, a tip on that, aside from Google offering a free version, especially if you're trying to, place someone's face, you've got a photo of a person and you think it may not be the person they're claiming to be. There's a Russian search engine called Yandex that is actually frighteningly good with detecting faces. So you can do Yandex reverse image search. I always encourage you as much as possible to use multiple reverse image search engines, and there's lots of free ones out there. So Google and Yandex are two of the best ones. And I'm actually in the Zoom chat here to everybody. I'm going to share a link there, bit.ly/verification tools and tips. This is an open Google Doc that I maintain, and it has a list of a bunch of really great, mostly free tools and some guides, some from me, some from some other people in this kind of field. And if you want for example, some browser extensions to help you with video verification and photo verification, One of the ones I listed at the top of that document is called InVid. It's a free Chrome extension. It has a reverse engine. It can also extract frames from a video, enable you to reverse image search those. So, you know, if you're wondering where did this video come from, searching on stills from a video can actually, again, give you some additional information as well. And one of the things that, you know, I mentioned, you always want to figure out who took the photo, where and when. You know, once you find that person, you obviously want to talk to them, and you want to say, if it's, you know, if they're not a professional photographer, ask them like, so tell me about it. Like, you were there, what did you see? Do you have other photos from that moment? Do you have other videos from that moment? Because if you're still unsure of who actually took the photo and they can provide you additional images, then that's a whole other level of confirmation you can get, showing that they were actually there. And then, you know, another key piece here for image stuff is every time a digital image is taken, there is data embedded in the file itself. It's called EXIF data. And I linked to a couple of EXIF tools, and InVid gives you some EXIF stuff. So if you have the original photo, what's called the camera original, from someone's phone, from someone's camera, and they email to you, if you use an EXIF data reader, again, EXIF, it'll tell you things like, you know, the camera that took the photo. You may even get super lucky and have data like the exact time and date it was taken. You may even get super lucky and have latitude and longitude, so it tells you roughly the location. And so doing that reverse image search, trying to get the originals from the person, finding that person, looking at the EXIF data, looking for additional photo and footage from that exact moment, that exact time, to see the broader context. Those are some of the fundamental things you want to do around images. And I'm just going to share another link here. So the first link is a Google Doc I maintain. The second one here is a free online book that I edited. It just came out a couple months ago from the European Journalism Center. I recruited some of the best researchers and journalists I know who investigate digital disinformation and media manipulation. And we have chapters on analyzing social media accounts, investigating websites, investigating images, and how to think about verifying potential deepfakes. We talk about doing things like network analysis. So trying to figure out if a bunch of Twitter accounts or a bunch of websites are all connected to each other, and how can you get to a level of confidence that you can actually, you know, report that publicly. So that's a free verification handbook. And it's actually the third one we've published. We have two other free handbooks that people can get. One has a more basics on verification, which I would encourage. That's at verificationhandbook.com. And then the second one was for investigative journalism, which talks a little bit about data, some advanced search techniques for Google. So those are all some free resources that I hope people will take advantage of. And I'll drop in the URL for the original two handbooks as well. But there is a ton of free information, a ton of free guides and free tools that you can use out there. And I really think for journalists, if you put some time into getting basic familiarity with this kind of stuff, it's a big advantage in your newsroom. People will look to you, people will value for that. If you're trying to land a job, having these skills is something that will actually do very well for you. And at the end of the day, if you know how to do this stuff and other people don't, you're going to find stuff that they didn't, and that's going to help your reporting.
Beautiful stuff. I'm like, knowledge is power. And I guess, you know, I know we've got cuts here with the BBC, and I think this is happening in the media world all over. You know, the more you can learn the specific, more specific skills you can have, the more chance you have of getting a job. I'm really sorry. I've just noticed the time. I can't believe it's like, I got a bit carried away, just sat there listening to everyone. It's 7:05. We've got quite a few questions in the box. I don't know if we could go to the questions and then we could see how much time we have left. I know I've still got a few more questions. There's a one from, is it George Chisa? Sorry if I butchered your surname, George. It says, do you feel that some media is way more concerned about being perceived as them presenting balanced views no matter what, which includes presenting contrarian opinions or theories that are not facts, just to be able to claim that their reporting is balanced? I don't know who wants to take that one. Andrea, do you want to go for that? She's on mute.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of, let me read the question as well. I'm reading it here. I think a lot of, media outlets I don't know if they're obsessed. I don't know, but I think that, you know, it is a very traditional look at journalism. You know, when I was at Columbia, like they harp that all the time, like objectivity, that's like the traditional way. And I just think that I wouldn't say, you know, there's so many publications out there. And I think like, you know, the reliable ones won't be, you know, publishing things that are fake just to appear balanced. I mean, I don't think that's not journalism to me either. So I think, you know, when it's easy with the internet, it's easy to have all of these different websites, and it can be confusing, but I think that there's a conversation around what objectivity looks like in today's climate, definitely. But I wouldn't say that at least reliable, like legacy, like really, you know, newspapers or, you know, media companies are going to ever publish something, or at least intentionally publish something fake so they can appear balanced. I don't think that that's ethical at all. And that's just not, I wouldn't say that's journalism. So I guess that's what I have to say about that. I mean, I know the Des Moines Register doesn't post, we're very meticulous about like, okay, like someone's saying this, okay, we want to be fair, but like, let's get the facts. Like we don't just post something that's not true. But then you do get the issue of police lying to the newspapers, and which happens often, and having to use police quotes to be fair and balanced, you know. I think that's more of like the issue that I'm seeing, or that tension that I'm seeing in that question is when police lie, and how do you prove that they're lying when, you know, you only have one spokesman that's willing to talk to you, you know what I mean? So that's a struggle, and that's a tension, I would say.
Montanique, Craig, feel free if you wanted to add anything to that.
I mean, I would just quickly say, like, I think it goes to this whole idea of false equivalency and false balance that I think has been a problem in media for a long time, where it's like, well, this side is saying this and it's a matter of opinion, so we'll go and get the other side to say that. And I think today it's something that newsrooms are grappling with more and more, because particularly in the US, you have the president who will just lie so frequently about the smallest and biggest things. And so a newsroom having to be like, wait, so the authority of the presidency is now basically completely undermined. We can't, you know, report something in a certain way just because the president said it. And so it's been a really good short-circuiting of what have been some bad habits over time. At the same time, newsrooms have really struggled to figure out how to deal with somebody who lies as frequently as he does and elevates extremist voices and all of these kinds of crazy things that you traditionally don't see from the presidency. And so, I mean, I think newsrooms are trying to get away from some of the habits that have led to false equivalency, and it's a process that's still underway. Like, I think everyone's still trying to figure it out, because it was kind of this weird interpretation of the concept of objectivity.
Cool.
Yeah, I think Craig and Andrea summed it up pretty well. I know for me, as far as pitching stories, the stories that I've heard from people in my community who have had negative interactions with law enforcement, that can be sometimes really graphic and traumatic. Some editors won't run what I tell them sources have said to me. I guess out of that fear of appearing too, I don't want to say radical, but too on the left side or too on the right side. And I personally struggle with that, because I know that these stories can be true, just because I've lived it myself. So I think that definitely needs to be a larger discussion in our industry.
Cool.
And then, like, how do you verify that? By going to police, and when police,
exactly,
you know,
the body footage isn't available, or the audio was turned off. And
so that's like, that's huge. That's something I'm seeing, like huge tension, not just with protesters in media, but within media itself.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
That's a great point.
We've got 5 minutes left, and we had quite a few questions about balance and bias. We've got Maria Iqbal says, what do you think about the media coverage of the protest? For example, some people call out media outlets for using images of protesters in stories about increasing COVID cases. Have you found the mainstream coverage of the protest and protesters to be balanced? I mean, like looking at the mainstream media's coverage of the protest.
I'm very particular about where my images go because I do not want them to be misused. So if anyone reaches out to me, and I've had non-journalism affiliated organizations like, for example, AARP and, that have publications and want to run my images. I'm very particular about who I share my images with because I do not want them to be misused. I don't agree with protest images being used in stories related to COVID cases, but that's just my opinion.
That's a really interesting question because also what's going on in Des Moines right now. Des Moines police charged at least one protester that's still in jail right now because they had police had they called it a hit list, basically like a picture or a paper with pictures that some of those pictures were taken from the Des Moines Register and of the protesters to find them, to arrest them for warrants about another protest. And it's definitely been that conversation, you're in a public space, you're protesting, you know, do you take your photos? Do we show your faces? But at the same time, they're using, police are using our photos to arrest protesters. That just happened last week or this past week. And one of the protesters is in jail still for I forgot the wording of the charge, but I think it's disseminating intelligence information when it's really just a piece of paper with photos that are already public. So it's actually a pretty crazy.
I'm happy you mentioned that, Andrea, because that's a big discussion in the photo industry too. Documenting vulnerable communities, people who can be targeted by police. And you see this with asylum seekers, and you see this with Black Lives Matter activists who can be harassed by law enforcement after these protests. And my strategy with that is I get as many names, numbers as possible. I get consent from people I photograph if their faces are clearly shown in images. And if I have an image where I haven't gotten consent from that person, I don't file that image. So.
Sorry, I'm curious of time. I know this is going to close in about 3 minutes. I do want to read this one out. It's not really a question, it's just more of a thank you. It's from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for your courage in covering such difficult events and sharing your pictures and experiences, but especially for sharing people's stories and documenting what's been happening. I thought I'd share that with you guys because I know the work that a lot of journalists do, regardless of what people see or think when they see loads of likes and retweets and shares and stuff. It's quite often a thankless task, isn't it? And I guess with every story, every time you guys are putting yourself out there, going out to tell the truth, you open yourself up to threat and vulnerability to people that don't want you to tell the truth. So I'd like to sort of get on board with thanking you guys in all the work that you do, and you will continue to do so as well. And also for taking part today. Now, I know the conversation is going to close in a couple of minutes. Would you guys like to let our audience know if they wanted to find you or ask any questions on social media? What is the best way for them to find you? Craig, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. It's pretty simple. I'm at Craig Silverman on Twitter. I do have open DMs, so feel free to tweet at me, to DM me. And if you want pointers to those resources, you didn't get them, or if I can be of help in any kind of way, please feel free to reach out. Cool.
Montanique?
Yes, and I see Penny asked the question for me to tell what I found out about my father. I can't go into too much detail about what happened to my father because I am in the process of pitching his story, but I will say that some information recently came out about the officer who killed him. And when news broke, local news broke in Austin that this officer had done something, no one reported that he killed a man. So that was very discouraging for me in this industry, that no one did that deep investigation into his past history. And so, yeah, just be on the lookout for hopefully one day I'll be able to share more. But you can find me on Instagram at Montanique Monroe. I believe you know how to spell my name now. It's on the screen. And then on Twitter, it's I am Montanique. That's IAM Montanique. And my website is montanique.com. And my DMs are open too.
Wow. And Andrea, please.
Yeah. Twitter is probably the best. My DMs are also open. You can also, follow my coverage. It's basically, so it's Andrea, ANDREA, M as in mom, and then my last name, SAHOURI.
Cool. Guys, I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who's taken part in the comments.
Where can we find you? Where can we find you?
I'm Kofi_Smiles, or you can just search the Smile Maker. Yeah, my DMs are always open. I know we've got some people asking some questions about the BBC. If you drop me a message, I'll be able to sort of find out if I can give you an answer. I don't know if I can speak on the behalf of a huge corporation like this, especially with the questions. But no, I really appreciate it. But I know this has been great, and I just want to say thank you to the CIJ for putting this together, putting all these talks together, and inviting me and asking me to be able to sit and listen to these fine journalists share their stories. And I'll definitely be digging into Craig's treasure chest of resources so I don't get caught out sharing a post out an apparent undercover police officer smashing windows during the protest. I can't believe that, honestly. I almost a heart jumped out my mouth when I saw it. I was like, no, I've been duped. But anyways, thank you very much, everyone. I'm not sure. I think if we close this, does it close on the YouTube stream as well? I don't know, but I'll let everyone say goodbye. And we've had a message. Thank you for your courage, inspiration, energy, and example. Be safe and carry on with bringing us objectivity and honesty with what you find. Beautiful, amazing, fantastic.
Thank you.
Cool. Cheers. Yeah. See you later. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. And I close it down now.
Bye. Oh, sorry.